Greetings from Paranormal M, your one-stop shop for all things mysterious and unexplained. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of our intriguing stories. We hope you enjoy listening as much as we enjoy sharing. Old story about a police officer who may have been an angel. This happened about 10 years ago. I was barely 20 years old living in Massachusetts. I was driving to my college at the time. I commuted to school. And this particular day was very snowy, icy, and sleeting. I didn't know why school was in session, but in the Northeast, they don't take bad weather very seriously. I think we've all seen the memes of cars and piles of snow on them saying that we're heading out to work. That's New England for you. So anyway, I'm driving to school and I was late. The road of which I was driving was a 2-lane highway that was very steep. Between the 2 lanes were Jersey barriers, and the opposite flow of traffic was on the other side. Like many roads in Massachusetts, there's no shoulders, and there was no turnarounds. Once you were on this highway, you had to drive another 5 miles before you could pull off the closest exit. It was the type of highway where if your car stopped, you'd be screwed, because there's nowhere to pull off. Again, lack of shoulders and grass. Just concrete barriers on both sides and a barrier in the middle. It was dangerous, but many people had died on it. Even a friend of my mom's coworker died on it. I was driving pretty fast for the type of weather I was in. I was in the far left, and I could see a tractor trailer in the far right, but behind my car. Suddenly, my car fishtailed, and I spun out completely. I was suddenly in the far right, facing oncoming traffic. The tractor trailer was coming at me, like coming at me. There was no time or place to go. I remember this feeling came over me like my brain didn't register what was happening. And suddenly, out of nowhere, my car was in reverse. And it was a miracle of a small little shoulder, but still facing oncoming traffic. I don't know how it happened, and I remember being in shock how I did that. The tractor trailer blew by me in a second. I was literal toast if I didn't get onto that shoulder. Breathing heavy and saying to myself, did I really just do that? Within what must have been 10 or 15 seconds, I hear a few knocks on my driver window. I know it was about 10 to 15 seconds because I had the Britney Spears song Stronger on my car flipped on the bridge of the song, and the knock came at my window at the last chorus. I open the window and a young male police officer is now staring right at me. He then says, "Hey, I saw your car spin out. I see the lights behind now, and his car parked right behind me is the same small squeeze of a shoulder we had." That ended up very quickly ahead. Clearly seeing me in what probably looked like total shock, he continued on. "You were going too fast." I said, "Yeah, I know." And then he says, in a nearly soft but direct tone, "Stop rushing. Why are you rushing? You need to relax, okay? Relax." It was something like that. He then says how he's going to stop traffic so I can turn my car around in the proper direction and get back onto the road. It's fuzzy how he did it, but I just remember him stopping the flow. I turned my car around out of the shoulder. Remember, my car was facing the wrong direction, so I wouldn't have to be able to even turn my car around to get back onto this icy, sleet, busy highway, and slowly pull it back into the proper direction I was supposed to be in. I continue on and look behind me. Normally you can see a cop pull out after you, see the lights on or the car themselves if they turn it off, etc. But all I saw were the cars that were waiting for me now driving. It's weird to explain, but this cop disappeared in seconds. Disappeared. Like I said, there was nowhere for this cop to go. The only turnaround, the small cutout the median cops tend to use in different directions, wasn't for another mile ahead, and the first exit off was for another 5 miles. This little shoulder ended right after where I was, and this cop was nowhere to be seen. It was so weird. I remember looking back several times in my mirror and saying, "Where did he go? What?" It was so odd, I thought about it all day. I came home and told my parents what happened. Of course, in shock that my car spun out in the opposite direction and I almost hit a tractor trailer, I told them exactly where this took place, how my car went into reverse, in which I have no recollection of, and the magical cop that showed up in 10 seconds and disappeared just as fast. My own parents thought it was the strangest thing. I've told the story to a few people I know who have also called it very weird. I think, and my parents agreed, either that cop was sent by God at that exact moment I needed help, or he wasn't really a cop at all. It's been a decade and I still think about this encounter. Without that man, I wouldn't be able to get back into the highway unless I took a risk and sat there in confusion and shock with the possibility of hitting someone while in the snow. Ice and sleet fell on my car. It was a very peculiar and life-saving encounter I won't forget. Vivid blue swirls, then bam. This event makes no sense. My wife, son, and I arrived home from spending my salary on an armful of groceries. Hyperinflation, am I right? They were still outside grabbing the smaller and lighter stuff. I had done the typical guy thing by grabbing everything to the point of looking like a pack mule. I stepped into the kitchen. Immediately the hair on my neck stood up. In front of me in midair were 3 nebulae, looking blue and teal with colored swirls. Much like a projection from a movie projector looks like, but much less bright and more dull. I suppose like a projection in a bright light looks like. I stood there like an idiot, completely confused. Partly this is cool, and partly this is strange and ridiculous. Mostly, this is impossible. As I'm stood there, I hear a loud bang. I turn quickly to figure out the culprit. The door behind me had slammed shut, and the chair behind said door then slowly flopped over and fell in front of the door that had just slammed itself. I was standing there trying to figure out what just took place when my son comes in. He looks at me and I say, "Did you do that?" He says, "Do what, Daddy?" I say, "Never mind, buddy." I then ask my wife for the same thing. She just says, "Is everything okay, honey?" I say, "Look." She asks if I knocked the chair over. I said, "No, damn it. That's why I'm perplexed, standing here staring at the chair and door." She admitted to me a few strange little happenings her and my son had been witness to while I'd been working. There's a bridge near where I grew up in bumfuck Tennessee that is notorious for screaming at people at night. The screams aren't audible to the houses nearby, and supposedly you have to sit on the actual bridge to hear it at all, though I personally haven't tested it or anything like that. The common explanation is that it's a bobcat that lives under the bridge, but people have checked with dogs and such and never find any sign of any. Well, some friends and myself had heard this story for years, all growing up, but never tested it. So, one night after a few beers, we get up the notion that we're going to go test this thing. So 5 drunk guys pile into a beat-up car, and we drive down to the park on the bridge. This is like 1:30 a.m. or so, and it's dead silent out. We sat there for a good 45 minutes, and nothing happened. We had the windows down and had started debating whether or not it was all bullshit when the scream happened. We had the lights off, and there was a moon, so you could see pretty well. And there for sure wasn't anything outside the car. But it was fucking loud, and it sounded like a woman with a particularly powerful lung having her skin ripped off right outside the window of the car, the rear passenger side, that faced the edge of the bridge. Now I've heard bobcats in heat while hunting, and they do kind of scream kind of thing. It's hard to describe it, but they do a little repeating burst. This was a good 3 or 4 second extended scream at incredible volume. We tore out of there like a demon was chasing us. A couple of miles down the road, we finally stopped and actually processed what happened. My adrenaline was going so badly, I was so scared I was just shaking uncontrollably. One of my friends had actually pissed himself, which I'd never seen anyone actually do. One friend immediately left the car and vomited. To give what I think was a good frame of reference to how actually terrifying this was, my friend whose car we were in wasn't even mad at the friend that pissed all over his seat. It was that insane. To this day, I have no explanation for it. I'm not sure if I had an encounter. This was something that happened back in 2016 at an apartment I lived basically my whole life. I'm a Buddhist, and growing up, my family and I believe in paranormal beings and spiritual events. I had a pet parrot at the time who sleeps on the bed with me, and I've had him for about 2 years or so. My apartment is cleansed by monks every year, a cultural tradition, and I've never experienced or sensed anything paranormal inside the house. As far as I remember, that particular month, I would get consistent nightmares. I would dream about being in a battlefield and I would be shot dead and would wake up in cold sweats in the middle of the night. One thing I noticed was that every time I wake up my parrot, it would be up and alert and would always be looking in one direction, which is that corner of my room. I talked to my parents about it, but they just discarded it. But at that one night, it was intense. It felt so real, and this guy dressed in an army uniform kept repeating the same phrase, "It's time to come back home." After that, when I woke up in cold sweats again, I noticed that my parent had jumped out of the bed and was literally in front squawking aggressively, as if it was trying to attack something at the same corner. By that time, I screamed for my parents, and when they came in for my parrot, it just stopped. And it was staring. In a sense, we're watching someone walk around. I told my parents everything that night, and my dad was pretty chill and told me someone from the past life might have visited me. After that night, those nightmares never came back, and everything is as normal as it can be. I'm not sure what happened, though. Still wondering about it till today. Back in 2013, I had just moved to a new house in a 3-house complex with my parents. Back in the day, I had a Siberian Husky with me. Goodest of boys. My bedroom was located right above the garage, which connected the backyard where my dog would spend the night. The second night after moving, my parents here both asleep in their room, and I could hear my dog barking away at around 11:30 p.m. He just wouldn't stop. So I got a little concerned and decided to go check him out. He was an older dog by then, and this behavior wasn't normal on him. When I found him, he was very agitated, and I struggled to calm him down, but eventually succeeded and led him back to the backyard. I then went back inside and went to wash my hands on the bathroom located close to the garage. Then I felt someone touch my right shoulder, and I heard a female voice say, "Why did you take the dog away?" The first thought in my mind was that it was my mom, so I replied by saying that he would keep the neighbors up if I didn't. But then I immediately realized it couldn't have been her, as she was asleep upstairs. I immediately ran up to check and found both of my parents sleeping in their room. A couple of days later, our new neighbor came to say hi. She was clearly distressed, and after asking what was going on, she told us that 2 days before we arrived at the complex, the nanny she hired to take care of her kids had committed suicide in their house. Furthermore, she was worried about her youngest child and would comment about seeing her roaming around the house. I still believe it was the spirit of their nanny that spoke to me that day. It never happened again, though. Tales of small people exist in various parts of Mexico as well. Went to Puerto Vallarta a couple of months ago, and we exchanged stories over a campfire. One story included tales about small people in the state of Guanajuato. Apparently, they enjoy playing tricks on people. They come out at night and mess with you. We were told that when she, the person telling the story, was young and lived in Guanajuato, her parents would warn her not to go out at night because the duendes would get her. They also all slept in the same room at the end of the night, and they would always hear shuffling and things moving in the early hours of the morning. They would find things in places they didn't leave them, and they would wake up to messes that a child would leave behind. They would never go out to investigate, but apparently one time her father did, and said he saw little people, and never spoke much of it after that. People would occasionally disappear as well. Once such development came to their city, power, utilities, basic necessities, people, and new buildings, the tales of small people disappeared. Their town had a lot of strange happenings before it became modern. Same thing for my family as well. Parents came from a poor town that had no electricity until the mid-70s, but before that came there were tales and sightings of witchcraft and a giant snake that lived in the hills above my town. People disappearing and people having curses placed on them. My grandparents told me a story once where they saw a woman float away into the air at about 3 or 4 in the morning. My grandmother didn't stick around to see who it was. My parents' town was also developed over soil where many soldiers lost their lives during war. When my grandparents were building their home, they built our home as well. They removed a lot of skeletal remains. Apparently, my home is haunted over there, but I never experienced anything. One of my cousins did, though. He said he always heard things like, "Chinga tu madre," fuck your mother, and whispered gibberish into his ear. One time he said a person appeared in front of, maybe 3 feet away from his face. He closed his eyes and they were gone. My aunt, his mom, said he went running home banging on the door with a petrified look on his face. My cousin is not the kind of person to make this up. He has experienced other supernatural things as well, and also had run-ins with the cartel, even though that's not supernatural, and seen some other unexplainable things happen. I hope I never experience these things. I haven't been to Mexico in 14 years. I'm planning a trip soon. I'll keep in touch if I experience anything. I got something that happened to me and a couple of buddies. I was 16 and my buddies were around the same age. We were on summer break, so we were partying all the time. One of my buddies invited my best bud and I to his house because his mom was gone for the night. Now we lived in a small town, maybe 8,000 people, and he lived about 15 miles out of town. So a really desolate area with only 2 to 3 neighbors within a 5-mile radius. There's a river that runs through his property, across to mountains, and some crazy caves. I only ventured into the caves a couple times because it's like a 7-mile walk along the river. There's some awesome Indian paintings on the rock walls there, like paintings of deer, birds, the sun. My buddy's dad showed the caves to him when he was alive, and he was very into his Native American culture. The caves weren't creepy at the time, but now looking back, it was pretty damn strange. It's about 3 a.m., and we're just hanging out in his living room, drinking and smoking the night away. They couldn't get cable or satellite out there, so it was just us bullshitting while on the couch. All night we were hearing stuff outside, some knocks and cracks. We just thought it was either a cougar playing around in the woods or some drunkard shooting guns across the river. We were at this house a lot in the summer and have seen plenty of deer and cougars on his property. We weren't spooked at all. Then all the power goes out. Pitch black everywhere. Looked outside and couldn't see a thing. So the 3 of us are sort of joking about it and thinking it would come back on in a second. About 5 minutes pass when I say, "What is that?" My buddies shut up and start to hear what I'm hearing. It sounded like a vacuum type of sound, like a bunch of air being moved around really, really fast. Maybe what people hear during a tornado. Then after all of us heard this strange sound, bam! Something hits the side of the house. Shakes the entire wall that I'm sitting beside. We went from joking to curious to holy shit, get me out of here. In about 10 minutes, none of us had cell phones on us, which were pretty worthless anyways out there. And his landline was down as well. Couldn't call anyone. No neighbors, nothing. We decided to light a candle because we couldn't find a flashlight. We opened the back door to see where the breaker was because it was in the backyard. You couldn't see a thing. It smelled like awful sulfur outside. All they have out there is well water, so we thought maybe it was the water line that broke into the house. My buddy ran outside to the candle and flipped the breaker. Nothing. We could see across the river and saw the light on the backyard of the house. It was so strange. For the next 3 to 4 hours, we laid on the floor of the living room, just hoping his mom would show up. Finally, through the trees, we saw headlights. We ran outside and told his mom something broke under the house and fucked up the power. She went to the breaker, got the power back on, checked the pipes, and everything was okay. Being 16, I just thought of it as maybe nothing. But 11 years later, I still can't tell you what happened that night. I've never heard that sound again and have no idea why the power shit on us. And not the houses around us. And what hit so hard that it knocked out the power for the house early this morning? A giant owl? A cougar? Maybe a bear? I have no idea, but whatever it was, I don't think it was trying to hurt us. My wife and I were at my in-laws, and at one point we were about to leave to our house, but before that, my father-in-law decided he was tired, and my mother-in-law said she needed to go to the bathroom. So, while picking up my stuff, my wife suddenly decided that she also needed to go to the restroom, leaving me alone in the small living room. I got bored immediately, so I picked up my phone to read Reddit or something. 2 minutes pass and I see my wife walk real quick through the hallway connecting the living and the kitchen, and I ask if she's ready. She didn't answer and kept walking, so I followed her into the kitchen and repeated the same question while blocking my phone and lowering it down to my pocket, but still no answer. She kept walking really quick through the kitchen to the dining room, and so I followed, thinking maybe she forgot something. As soon as she walks by, I followed her while asking a third time if we were leaving, and she kept walking through another hallway, leading to a bigger living room and a bathroom for guests. My in-laws' house is really nice and big, by the way, so I'm thinking maybe she wants us to go to the guest bathroom because of some unknown reason or maybe needed privacy. So I walked back to the kitchen and proceeded to unlock my phone and yell, "Hey baby, whenever you're ready, just tell me." And like 30 seconds later, I could hear her yelling from my in-laws' room that she was terribly bored and that she wanted to go home. That's when my blood felt like ice and I got confused. So I tried to ask as calmly as possible, "Are you ready or not?" And my wife kept yelling until she came to the kitchen through the opposite way I thought she was. Immediately she saw my face and asked what the fuck happened. So I ran to the guest bathroom and opened the door. Nothing. Ran to the dinner room table, and then to the big living, nothing. Then I saw her a bit scared and I explained what was going on. I noticed that the woman I saw wasn't even dressed as my wife. And I was also distracted by the phone, that I just didn't even think about the way my wife was dressed. She said that no one was at the house except for us and her parents, who already were asleep at their bed. That was a couple years ago, and I still open the living room door from time to time expecting to see that woman. It gives me the chills to think what would have happened if I kept following. Was she going to show me something? Tell me something? Was she real? Or is it just my head playing tricks on me? What the hell? Stereotypical skeptic here. Went for a trip with high school friends at one of their cabins on the coast of Lake Huron. 2 days in, we have a bonfire and a barbecue. It's the most beautiful, clear, calm night I've ever seen, including camping in Utah wilderness. There was literally no audible waves. The lake was perfectly reflecting the sky until the full moon slowly crept into its zenith and washed everything into a silver glow. I cannot accurately share the awe I had for the nature at that moment. So everyone, except for my girlfriend and I, had some edibles, as we had to leave right the next day and didn't know the dosage, so for work reasons, we played it safe. Eventually, the fire burns to embers and the embers die out. It has to be about 3 or 4 at this time. The only one awake are my girlfriend, my best friend Richard, and myself. We spent the last half hour just silently contemplating our lives when it happened. First, my senses dulled. It felt like hearing became muffled, my vision slightly blurry, and even smells seemed weak. One is able to see cargo ship on the lakes at night, but suddenly they all vanished on the horizon. Even the beautiful reflections just seemed to vanish, so all of a sudden, that all that was left was a dim silver moon in an otherwise pitch-black sky. At this point, I looked at the others and noticed them squirming in the seats, looking worried. Then I heard something, a crunching underfoot of something walking the Pebbles beach. Very, very loud and very distinct. And somewhat far off in the distance, muffled a little, was someone crying. This was full-on grief crying, almost bawling. This was a full moon night, and even with the blurry vision I experienced, one could still see any shapes of figures on the beach in both directions for at least 2 miles. Not a soul save for our group was on this beach. After 2 minutes, I noticed the footsteps becoming far louder as they were approaching us, and I just started feeling extremely sad and paranoid. I felt as if there was no point to anything. All I could feel was grief. I wish to stress that my wife and I were completely sober, while our friend Richard was very, very high. But all 3 of us at the time decided to nope right the hell out of there. We didn't say anything. We looked at each other. Couldn't tell all 3 of us felt extremely sad for no reason, and just instantly walked back up to the cabin offshore without even grabbing our stuff. When we walked off the beach, it took about 2 minutes before everything seemed to go back to normal. The cabin itself is about 6 meters above the beach, so you could get an even better view, and we could confirm not a soul was walking on the beach at all. Cut to the next day. I wake up and cook breakfast for everyone, but I felt uneasy. I talked to my girlfriend and got shocked when she says that she felt grief-stricken last night. Then Richard says, "Man, I must have been really out there because I got super paranoid and sad." I brush it off as being tired, though at least at the time I was wide awake. While relaxing the day away, we find some book about the lakes. I grab one from the light reading in the hammock outside. It's a book of stories and history of the lake. I'm into that sort of thing and start breezing through when I come across a story about Minnie Quay, a small-town legend about a girl who loved a sailor and when he didn't return, walked off a pier and committed suicide. Pretty standard sea legend trope, really. But then I read on and find she's supposed to haunt the beaches of one Forester, Michigan. And that right there is when I freaked out. I ran out to my girlfriend and Richard and demanded, maybe a little too spontaneously, for them to write down what happened next. They are confused but oblige, and when we read through, we see each of us experience the same series of events down to the small details. Our cabin was in Forester, Michigan, and we heard Minnie Quay weeping for her lost love. Hell, we felt it. I wish to state the following. 1. I swear I never once heard of Minnie Quay beforehand, even in passing. No one until that moment even knew. 2. All of our friends were asleep and accounted for in the cabin, and the only way for it was via stairs, so no way they could scare us when walking past us. 3. I aim to be a scientist, so I take empirical evidence as paramount. It is very possible, especially given weather conditions, for distinct echo effect explaining the sounds. Maybe some area of localized waves moved the stony beach just enough. But no explanation for all 3 of us having the same environmental dulling and feeling of grief. At least none that I'm aware of. So yeah, that's my one and only true paranormal experience. I 100% believe, well, not in ghosts exactly, but that something is clearly responsible for the origins of such legends, and that the Ballad of Minnie Quay, yes, there is a ballad for her, has some basis in fact. Grief-stricken, no thank you, never want to experience that again fact. A few years back, I was backpacking with my girlfriend, deep in a state park in northeast Pennsylvania. Late one night, I couldn't sleep. The woods are spooky at night, and I saw a floating light. Both me and my girlfriend could see the light through the thin fabric of our tents as it floated up and down, slowly coming closer to us. I thought it was another hiker, a forest ranger. Nope. Silent. I was freaking out. I verified that she could see it too. I yelled. I called out. It was still silent. I too freaked out to open the zipper. The light approached from a few dozen yards away, traveling in a wave-like path up and down. The light made a circle around her tent, coming as close as to about maybe 3 feet, and left the same way it came. The next day at a ranger station, I asked if anyone had reported seeing floating lights, and naturally, they said no. The only explanation I could believe was that I had encountered a truly unexplainable phenomenon. I was reluctant to call it a ghost or an alien. I normally don't believe in anything like that, so my mind just couldn't wrap itself around what I had seen.
2 years later.
My girlfriend and I were hiking a couple dozen miles deep into a different forest in North Pennsylvania. Same tent. Late one night, I couldn't sleep, and again I saw a light through the fabric of my tent. Again, I verified that both I and my girlfriend could see the light. It got closer, floating up and down just like before when suddenly it landed on the tent. It was a firefly. It was a goddamn firefly the whole time. Sometimes fireflies don't turn off their butts for a while. Sometimes they leave their light on as they fly around, scaring the bejesus out of innocent hikers. I've often wondered how many floating light orb stories could be explained that way. Me and family moved into a house when I was still in high school, and the moment I first walked in, it felt weird to me. It felt like someone had just left the room. It was a very long story, so bear with me. I'd hear footsteps at night, some even by my bed. Crazy dreams. My niece dreamed that she was floating to the ceiling when she spent the night with us. In her dream, her nose touched the ceiling. I dreamt that my mom gave her her dresser and that it was haunted. I told my mom about it, and she turned white. She told me that she was planning to give me her dresser and forgot to tell me. Flies. There were a ton of flies in the guest room windows. I couldn't figure out how to remove the window screens, so I got a newspaper to kill them. The more I killed, the more there were. I killed over 200 before my stomach finally got queasy and I gave up. They didn't swarm or anything like in the movies. Could be a non-paranormal reason for them, but it was very unusual. Something pulled my mom and dad's blanket and sheet off their bed. My mom was awake, but my dad wasn't. She pulled the blanket and the sheets back up and did it again. The blanket and sheet were pulled all the way into the floor at the foot of the bed. My mom pulled them back up and laid there under the covers, gripping them until morning. She didn't wake my dad. She didn't want to ruin both their sleep. My niece was standing in the big basement. She could hear something running circles around her, but she couldn't see anything. My mom would hear the same voice occasionally, but from upstairs. My mom heard my guitar in the basement, and I assumed I left my amp on. Our basement had a locked door with no other way in, so I went to check. Guitar was in my case, and the amp wasn't on. She would also hear my stereo I kept down there, but same result. I moved my stuff upstairs after that. My niece heard some kind of chanting while watching TV one night, but there was no chanting in what she was watching. She'd turn the sound down and it would go away. I wouldn't get up in the mornings before school and wash my hair in the kitchen because the house didn't have a shower, just a bathtub. It always felt like someone was standing there behind me when I did this. Sometimes it felt like someone was walking behind you through the house. I always felt watched there, even when I was alone. I had some pretty heavy metal posters on my bedroom wall. Some had skulls. I had these posters at my previous house, and they didn't bug me. But at this house, I began to have weird dreams about them, so I trashed them. The energy in the room seemed to get a little bit better afterwards. I had a second-story bedroom, and there's no way anyone could see inside. But I always felt like someone was watching from the window or the area next to the window. One day, the house owner told us that her and her husband wanted their house back. My mom told my sister that it wasn't their house, it was the devil's house, and that the owners should just write devil on the front door. A few nights later, I was in the bathroom and noticed that the word devil was on the back of the bathroom door. My sister and mom asked if I did, and I hadn't. We went to clean it off, and it wouldn't come off. It was part of the wood. It looked like when you write with your finger on a surface, and you can see your natural oil from your finger on the surface. Except this wouldn't wash off. We kept it covered with a towel. My mom heard a really deep voice one night. She said it was either a growl, and she couldn't make out what it said. As we began to pack one day, me and my niece were boxing up the kitchen while my mom was boxing up knickknacks in the living room. The two rooms were separated by just a counter. My mom said a gray, smoky figure walked through, and she couldn't see its head look around at all. The packed boxes, it was checking them, like it was tracking our progress. It then went into the guest room and disappeared. My mom didn't tell us at all, because my niece was very little. She told me after we moved. Other things I remember. I couldn't play my electric guitar in the basement because the strings would literally shock me. Guitar was fine upstairs, though. New batteries in the basement, smoke detectors, would go dead in days. The owner's aunt left the house to them. Not sure if she died in the house. I dreamt about mirrors a lot while living there. I believe it was a demonic haunting. This is small, but still creeps me out to this day. When I was 8, my sister and I shared a room on our first floor. Our bedroom door sort of led into the kitchen. My sister had this monkey clock that I looked at every morning to gauge how much more time I had to sleep in. Anyway, one morning around 7:20, I woke up and rolled over to look at the clock. In my groggy gaze, I got the time, but then who I thought was my dad moved in front of it. Now at that time, I remember seeing a dark figure with no visible features, like pure black. I didn't think anything of it, since I was just waking up and assumed it was just my tired eyes. Seeing this, and yes, I made a note that I did, I started to rub my eyes and feel him sit at the foot of my bed. At the same time, I said, "What do you want, Dad?" I didn't get an answer. I sit up as quickly as possible and see no one there. I look back towards the monkey clock, and only about a minute has passed. I sprinted out of bed and into the kitchen to find my dad. But the only one there was my mom at the counter, with a now shocked look on her face, looking directly at me. I mean to her, did I just come out rushing into the room directly at her, absolutely for no reason? Before she could ask me anything, I say, "Mom, where's Dad?" Puzzled, she says, "He left at like 6:30 or so. Going to work." Why? Obviously, I couldn't tell her what I saw. She'd think I was nuts. So I just said, "Never mind. Thanks, Mom, I'll go back to bed." For a good while, I forgot about it. But years later, my older sister asked me if I'd ever seen a black figure walk through the house. My heart stopped at the realization that my eyes weren't playing a trick on me. Years after that, I told my dad, who to this day is a skeptic. He doesn't believe me and said that it was just making me think someone was in the house, which was impossible without my mom knowing. Personally, I believe, and also know, he wasn't there to hurt me. I felt a caring soul pass by me that day, which is why I immediately thought my dad. I went to a tiny old movie theater, designed for children's animated shorts in Japan, in 2012. I was a senior in college then. The theater had more children in the seats than adults, but I was really interested in the animation because I was a Studio Ghibli short. As the movie started, I could see from the corner of my eye the little girl sitting to my right starting to stare at me. I felt uncomfortable but assumed maybe it was because I was a little different in appearance than what she was used to. But then, as the movie continued, she got on her knees and faced me, staring dead blank at me. I decided to ignore her because I didn't want to disturb others around me, but I was really uncomfortable. She never seemed to turn away, and I wasn't able to focus on the movie and instead started to puzzle together what I would say to her once the movie was finished. I didn't want to say anything mean, but I wanted to point out to her and her parents that the behavior may make people uncomfortable. The movie finished in 30 minutes because it was an animated short and the lights turned on. I turned to the girl to address the situation and found myself staring at a wall. There was red wallpaper with cute little animal designs, but no room for a child to sit between myself and the wall. There was a remnant of another wooden seat beside me that had been cut off, as though maybe the theater used to be a little bit bigger. All the wood seats were connected. It was only about 2 centimeters of the seat from the handle still remaining. I didn't really know what to do, so I just kind of left. Years ago in college, we were sharing ghost stories when a friend told a tale in which the parent did, as you suggested was logical, eventually switch rooms with the child to find out the truth. So, the story is that when his family, parents and their 2 boys, moved into their new house, everything was basically hunky-dory except for my friend's little brother, who was having trouble sleeping and insisted that his room was haunted. The parents figured it was just a symptom of the move, maybe, and that he'd get over it. But as time went on, the youngest boy got more paranoid and anxious about the room and not less. Eventually, bedtime became such a hassle with this kid that the father relented and said that this time he'd sleep in the kid's room to prove it wasn't haunted, while the boy would be asleep in his parents' bed with his mother. So the morning after the swap comes, and everyone's milling about getting breakfast, when Dad comes downstairs, and people of course want to know how he slept. To everyone's surprise, he says to the youngest, "Yeah, you're not sleeping in that room anymore," which obviously wasn't what people expected. Apparently, as my friend recounted, when his dad slept in the room, he reported he had to sleep facing the wall, because anytime he slept facing out towards the room, he couldn't escape this really awful feeling that someone or something was knelt by his bedside, staring him in the face. And that, as you can imagine, did not lend itself well to a restful sleep. Once the youngest was out of the room and settled into another, the drama over bedtime stopped. Now, my personal take on this is that Dad actually slept fine, then lied to the kid the next day to vindicate him, effectively playing into the kid's logic about the room being haunted, while fully intending to change his room so as to end the nightly drama. But it's a fun story either way. When I was around 13, I was upstairs in my grand's house, drying my hair in one of the bedrooms. It was a very small house, so it shared a door jamb with my aunt's bedroom next door. Over the sound of the hairdryer, I heard this sudden racket. I switched the hairdryer off, and it sounded like my aunt's room was being ransacked. Because the rooms were so close, I could clearly hear things getting thrown around, drawers being rummaged through and then slammed shut. Trying to come up with a rational explanation, I summoned all my courage and went to have a look. As soon as I got to the door, everything suddenly stopped. I peeked in and nothing was out of place. I was pretty freaked out, but still trying to tell myself I was hearing things. So I went back to drying my hair. The second I flicked the hairdryer back on, it started up again. This time I bolted. I daredn't dare look into the room, but I distinctly remember the noise continued as I ran past. I went barreling down the stairs and straight into the arms of my dad, who was sneaking upstairs to catch me going to my aunt's things. I denied it was me, but he said that he had heard me downstairs. I think he believed me when he saw how rattled I was. A few other things happened over the years, but the next thing that really sticks out was when I'd moved away to another city for uni and was renting a house with some friends. One night, a noise startled me awake, and I sat up to see my grandpa standing at the foot of my bed. This was the husband of my gran from the first story who died when I was young, and it was not a nice sight. He was slightly glowing, and his eyes were red. He had a smile that was way too wide and filled with sharp teeth. My thoughts along the lines of, am I actually seeing this? Yep, I'm awake. Am I sure I'm awake? Touch the bed covers. Can feel the texture? Yep, definitely awake. Well, shit. I'm really seeing this. I sat there staring at this thing for maybe a minute before it slowly faded away. There had been weird things happening to me ever since I was a kid, and it kind of felt in a way like this was just a big reveal, like it was him the whole time. Since then, nothing even remotely spooked has happened to me. One Sunday morning, I was in my kitchen, having a cup of tea with my wife. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what I thought was my 3-year-old daughter walk out of the front room and into the entrance hall. I went to see what she was doing, and when I got there was no one there. I walked back into the kitchen and said to my wife something along the lines of, I'm bloody seeing things. I could have sworn I saw Amelia walk into the front door, but when I got there, she was nowhere to be seen. My wife was all like, you're joking. The same thing happened to me and my mom just the other day. She explained how the same thing happened to them in the exact same spot, with the mysterious girl taking the exact same route. In fact, so convinced were they that when they had seen our daughter, that they actually crept into the entrance hall after her to make her jump. But there was no one there. It didn't end there, though. A few months later, we saw a post on a local Facebook page saying, I had a lovely childhood growing up in our dress. I'd be really keen to speak to whoever lives there now, particularly to see if they haven't or had experienced any paranormal things going on. I direct messaged the poster and asked if she had ever seen anything untoward, without giving any indication of what we had experienced. Lo and behold, her and her sister used to see a little blonde Victorian girl in a white nightie standing outside their bedroom doors or walking through the house. She related how initially she would think it was the other sister and would go out to investigate and find no one. I'm a very cynical person by nature, and I didn't previously believe in the paranormal, but I have no explanation for the above. My old apartment was the upstairs of a house, which was built in 1890, and it used to be a church. There was a room by the front door, I'll call it the front room, which was used as a living room because the actual living room felt spooky and weird stuff happened in there. Noises and voices, bumps and creaks, knocking. That place was haunted. One example. A friend of mine is over. We're in the front room. He goes to the living room to play some guitar, which is down the hall, and goes to the bathroom and comes back to the front room. I then go to the bathroom, which is down the hall, right by the living room. As I'm about to go in the bathroom, I look in the living room and see a cigarette butt sitting directly in the middle of the living room on the carpet. I'm like, why did he leave a cigarette butt in the middle of the room? So I pick it up and put it in the ashtray, then go to the bathroom and head back to the front room. I ask my friend, hey, it was so weird. There was a cigarette butt right in the middle of the living room. I put it in the ashtray. And he says, wait, what? When I went into the bathroom and came out, I saw the exact same thing. It was in the middle of the room, and I didn't know how it got there, so I put it in the ashtray. So, to summarize, a friend was living in a room and smoked a cig, went to the bathroom, came out, saw a cig butt in the middle of the living room floor on the carpet, which makes no sense. He picked it up and put it in the ashtray. I, very shortly afterward, went to the bathroom, saw the same cigarette butt in the middle of the room, and put it in the ashtray again. Ashtray was empty. This was the only cigarette butt in the room. Neither of us have any way of explaining how this happened. A cigarette butt jumping out of an ashtray twice, all the way to the middle of a room? When I was a kid, I lived in an old white farmhouse with my dad, stepmom, brother and stepsister. Brother and I had the basement. Sister and stepsister got rooms in the house. Basement was right off the back porch, with just a screen door keeping anyone out, since the basement door didn't lock. Well, this arrangement lasted for about a month or two. Then things got strange. We all start hearing weird noises late at night in the darkness of the property. Sometimes see eyes moving around outside. That wasn't the bad part. We could live with that. What we couldn't live with was the scarecrow. In the field behind our place was a scarecrow. Nothing like Harold from Scary Stories. This one wasn't very humanoid. It was basically a coat, a flour sack full of something, and a wooden pumpkin for a head. After those first 2 months, we noticed he started moving around the field. And it was overgrown, so you'd see a path if anyone walked out there to move him. Days pass, and he keeps moving. But he hadn't come any closer to the house. Just hopping around in the fields. Then one day, he's by the old barn. The property had a barn across from the back door, and a longhouse for chickens or something a bit off to the right of the back door. So it's fairly close. Naturally, none of us are happy, but he still kept away from the house. Then came the day my dad and I were home alone. Stepmom was off doing something with my stepsister. Older siblings were off staying with friends. We walked out the back door and stepped onto the back porch. Scarecrow is blocking the screen door leading off the porch. My dad breaks part of the porch getting out. Then we leave. We come back later, after he brought an axe. Scarecrow is now in our house. Dad drags it outside and chops it up, throws it in a bonfire, then digs a hole in the gravel driveway and buries it. A month later, we would come home from going to the movies. Driveway is dug up. Scarecrow is standing where we usually park the family car. We moved out the next day. No clue what happened to that scarecrow, since the house is now across from a casino. One recurring thing was what I thought was me having a brain aneurysm or something. My left temple would flutter. It would hurt and move a lot, and I would hear this kind of squelching sound. What was eerie about it was that I also heard a woman laughing very loudly. This happened usually when everyone was asleep or I was alone. No TV or radio on. No explanation for the sound besides maybe I was dying and it was an auditory hallucination or something. Some years later in the same house, my younger half-sister moved in. She always accidentally locked herself out of her room, which was odd, but she was pretty accident-prone. Anyways, one day I'd gotten her a comic as a gift, but she wasn't home, and her door was locked. I planned on setting it on her bed or something. Oh well, I just slid it under the door, saw it slide pretty much to the other side of the room. I went to my neighbor's place to chill and saw this Pokemon wrapping paper, and I decided I just had to go get that comic and wrap it up before my sister got home. Well, I go back home, and maybe 20 minutes have passed, and the comic is in the middle of the hallway. The door is still locked. I was alone. No one else came home until hours later. Anyways, I just wrapped the comic book like I intended to this time, and slipped the lock on the door and placed it on her bed. I didn't relock it, but when my sister got home that night, she was pissed because her door was locked again. Again, not creepy at all, but maybe paranormal. Once I heard some man yelling, "Oh shit," in my dad's room while he was at work. I thought his girlfriend was cheating on him or something, but when I tried to tell him, he just laughed it off. Apparently, again, I was home alone. I used to live in a very small flat with only 2 floors, so like an upstairs and a downstairs, which led to separate front doors for each person. We were upstairs, and there were massive trees in front, which almost covered the windows as we were upstairs and they reached the trees. I always felt strange in that house, like there was a presence in there. I was desperate to move out, and we weren't intending to live there for very long. Every time we tried to move a house, something would happen, and we couldn't, which led me to think that the houses didn't want us to leave, and we would be stuck there forever. I was very young, and the house was driving me insane, so I don't know. We managed to move out eventually, proving my belief of being trapped there wasn't real. A few strange encounters where things would go missing all the time. For example, I had this fake cleaning set, and I kept it in between a gap between my toy box and clothes drawer, and never used. But one day, it completely disappeared, and at first, I thought I had misplaced it, but it was nowhere to be found. A few months later, my cousin found it in the exact same spot it was supposed to be, even though I was certain it wasn't there, which kind of scared me. Also, I had a tablet which I put on my bed, and left the room only to come back and not notice anything till it wasn't there. I never found it, and Google just took it off my device list, and it was untracked and almost non-existent, apart from we still have a charger, another case in the box it originally came from. And also, when I Google my email, that device always comes up, and it's always the only thing that comes up. I doubt this was paranormal, I'm pretty sure my mom took it, but it's a bit of a mystery as to why no one knows where it went. And me and my mom were the only people in the house. At least, we're supposed to be. One thing I would always hear is footsteps outside my room, and would always imagine a ghost girl outside my room with black hair in front of her face and a white dress. I would go crazy if the door was ever left open, and would imagine someone stood at it. In my old room, there was this cellar, which I didn't and still don't find creepy. But one day, I could hear all my favorite music coming out of it. There was no radio there or anything, so I don't know where it came from. Plus, it wasn't very popular anymore for anyone to be playing it, apart from me. But I was happy and didn't think much of it at the time. There could be all childhood imaginations, but the noises didn't seem to be from the neighbors, because the walls between my house and the neighbor's house were quite a distance away from my room, and the wall from my room just led to the stairs. So you couldn't hear the neighbors from my house. Also, the downstairs noises couldn't have been footsteps, but really did sound like it was coming from outside my room. This happened last year. My parents are big into collecting milk, glass, and colored glassware. They pick colors for every child and collect the colored glass and give it to us every Christmas. They started this when I was a teen, and I'm 22 now. So of course, my color was black. Last year, they gifted me a lot of black glassware, and at this point in my life, I was jumping places to live, and I just rode around in my trunk. I swear the moment they gave me this one specific bowl that sat in my trunk, every driver on the road tried to hit me, or would nearly get into a wreck, every time I drove. This rode around with me for 6 months or so, and the incidence was almost constant. I moved in with my sister and her family during this time and began unpacking my trunk into my room. Backstory. My niece, this sister's daughter, has correctly predicted 3 pregnancies before they were announced, or even known about. 2 of the people went home and took pregnancy tests that came back positive. One person knew but was keeping it a secret and only admitted it when she said, "Oh, there's a baby in there." She now has to sleep with an eye cover because she thinks that she's seeing things at night. She's only 6. We all regard her as an almost medium in the family because of her affinity to these things. My room directly opened to a view of the staircase, and doorways to both kids' bedrooms and my sister's bedroom. While living there, I kept hearing footsteps and noticed what I thought was my nephew walking the downstairs every night at like 1 a.m. for candy or a snack. Every time it was a little boy about 4 feet tall with dirty blonde, almost brown hair. as quiet as can be, walking down the stairs. A few times I would go down after him, but just thought he would be hiding when I couldn't find him. Eventually, I asked him while we were all at the dinner table about him waking up so late for snacks. My niece just sits there, wide-eyed, but didn't say anything at the time. My nephew denies it pretty honestly. A few other things happened, including my niece suggesting burning black candles to cleanse the house. Creepy. This kept occurring for about another week, until I'm sleeping one morning until my sister and my niece burst into my room in a panic. This is my sister. "Did you just hear that?" Of course, I'm half awake and ask, "Just hear what?" A little boy just stood up in my doorway and screamed, "Look at me!" My niece then chimed in like, "Yeah, I heard it too." And I met Mom at my door, and we went to check on my nephew, but he was still sleeping, so we came in here. I threw out the bowl the same day and everything stopped. I later asked if they were just trying to scare me, but they still stand by it actually happening. In hindsight, I should have sold the bowl because anyone would have bought a black glass bowl said to be haunted.